our course. What is it all about? Why are we doing economics? What the heck is economics anyway? And how is this relevant? Mick Jagger summed it all up. You can't always get what you want, okay? The basic concept of economics is that we live in a world where not everybody can get everything they want at the time they want it. It is just impossible. Why is it impossible? Because we do not have infinite resources at our disposal. We have limits. We only have so much money. We only have so much energy. We only have so many resources. We only have so much knowledge. We only have so much of things. And because of that, we have something called scarcity, what they call in economics as scarcity. In other words, you got to look for it. It takes a bit of effort to get what you get. Scarcity drives us to make choices. We say, oh, goodness, we can't do that. So what else can we do? What's the next thing we can do? Okay, can we do that? Yeah, okay. So we have to make choices. We have to make choices in our lives. You know, if we come to school, we can't work. Well, that's a choice we make. Okay? But because we make those choices, we suffer from or incur, whatever you want to call it, opportunity costs, meaning that there's a cost to the choices that we make. If you're in school, you can't work. And the very fact you can't work means you can't make $15 an hour. So every hour you spend in school is costing you what you could have been at work. So it's costing you $15 an hour to be here, plus the cost of attending to start with. So the opportunity cost is not really something you see in accounting. You know, if you think about it, well, okay, I'll pay $300 for the course. The course is 30 hours long. That means it costs $10 an hour. Okay? That's fine. And that's an accountable, quantifiable amount. So, as I said, economics is really a study of choice. We all have to make choice. And the question is, from our point of view of why are we doing this course, we want to understand why people make the choices they do. What drives them? So it's as much psychology and philosophy as anything else. What is it that people do that? And we make a critical assumption that people are rational. People don't make irrational decisions. They do it because they want to get something out of it, as opposed to I'm just pushing buttons at random, okay? We also know that things are scarce. We don't have infinite supplies of anything. And because of that scarcity, we have to give some things up in order to do other things. If we go on vacation, we can't work, for example. Or if we work, we can't go on vacation. Economics, then, is hugely relevant because of this, because each and every one of us and every firm have to make choices every single day. And the question is, what are the best choices? And everyone has an opinion on what we define as the best choices. We're not going to be able to define what the best choice is in this course. However, we will develop some tools for making those choices, okay? That's the primary things that we're doing in this course. What are some of the tools that we can employ in order to make better economic choices? Economics, particularly microeconomics, comes with a whole bunch of controversies out there that we're going to look at in this course. We're going to look at and say, okay, let's see what real benefit there is to people because of things like economic growth, okay? You know, we think, well, okay, if we get economic growth, lots of jobs, lots of opportunities, you're going to be happy, aren't you? Because you're going to graduate into a world that has huge opportunities and huge chances for you to be able to use the skills you have to make a lot of money. Right. Well, that's great. And that is very good. However, there are people on the other side of the fence who have no skills, no knowledge. And will there be any jobs for them? Probably not. Will they be able to make enough money to live? Probably not. If the price of housing goes up because there are so many people coming into our town because of the opportunities here, will people be able to afford to live in here anymore? Probably not. So economic growth, even though it provides a benefit to so many people, there are also other people who do not benefit from it and who suffer the ill effects of it. So it is a big controversy to say, well, our government should focus on growth. Okay, yeah, that's good. But we also need to consider what happens to the people who get left behind. Income redistribution is another very common one that comes up in the economic literature. It says, okay, There are a lot of people out there who are workers. There are a lot of people out there who are trying to make ends meet. There are a lot of people out there who are struggling, and there's a lot of people out there unskilled. There's a few people out there who have it all together. They have the skill, they have the opportunity, they have the luck, they have the family money behind them. They're doing really, 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 really well. So the top 1% of Canadians, for example, have 25% of all the wealth in Canada. So the top 1% hold 25% of the wealth. So that means the bottom 75%, the bottom 99% have 75% of the wealth. So you can imagine that it gets a lot thinner down for the rest of us. So what are we to do? Do we allow rich people to be phenomenally rich and poor people to be phenomenally poor? Well, a lot of people argue that's not very good. We can't do that. In fact, if you listen to the political campaign on now for the federal election, you're going to see that this is a very common argument in the federal election. Should the rich be able to continue to make oodles of money while so many other people fall behind? So income redistribution is basically the old theory of rob from the rich and give to the poor. How can governments allow us to be a more equitable society so that all of us have enough money to live and the really rich are taxed to be able to pay to support the people who are on the downside? And the thing is, should we tax the rich? What will happen to the rich if we tax them enormously? Will they all go to the United States or somewhere else? That's a possibility. We have to weigh those things out. And are the poor deserving of the money? Should we just let the poor go away? What do I care about the poor? Could be an argument. There's all kinds of extreme points of view out there. Another big one is pricing of products that not all of us use. Not all of us use the roads, for example. Not all of us have a car. Not all of us use the ferry going over to Belle Island. Why should we pay for it if we're not using it? That's the basic crux of the argument. The user pay model has become common in the United States. So effectively, you want to drive on a highway in the United States, it's not uncommon to have to pay a toll. Now, you'll notice that in the United States, gas is quite a bit cheaper. It's half the price as it is here. And you ask, well, why is that? Well, the fact of the matter is they don't have as high tax on their gas. Most of our gas prices is tax. So they don't have as high a tax on the gasoline. So as a result, the gas price is lower. But on the other hand, there's no tax money to go into roads. Unlike in Canada, where a good chunk of the money from gas sales goes into redeveloping roads. In Newfoundland, this is a particular issue with the ferry fleet. The internal ferry fleet. This is not Marine Atlantic. This is like the ferries going from the main island to the other island. So, for example, the most common example that we know about is the Belle Island Ferry. I don't know if you've been on it, but the Belle Island Ferry goes between Portugal Cove by St. John's to a little island called Belle Island. And there's about 600 people that live over in Belle Island. Here is the ferry. That's a $70 million ferry. It goes back and forth 4 or 5, 6 or 7 times a day. It doesn't cost very much to get on the ferry, but all of us are paying for it. In fact, the toll ferry system in Newfoundland costs as much as running the Trans-Canada. So it gets a bit challenging and very controversial. Another big controversy is globalization. Globalization means that we source product from the cheapest parts of the world. So we get a lot of stuff made in China. And as a result, we can go up to Walmart and buy things cheaply. I can go buy stuff now, that I'm thinking it probably costs more money to ship it here than what they're selling it for. I can go up to Walmart and buy something for $1, okay? And it came from China. Well, how much did it cost to ship it? Well, probably almost $1. How much did someone make producing that? Very little. So globalization has meant that I can go to Walmart and buy stuff cheap. That's the benefit to me. The downside of globalization is it has shifted a lot of jobs to that part of the world. And there's a lot of controversy about whether or not we should be doing that, particularly now, because we've seen the global pandemic has meant that global supply chains, the flow of products from the third world to us, has been disrupted. So as a result, you can't buy a car now because there are very few computer chips to go into cars. And as a result, car sales are down. We also have this issue of provision of healthcare. In Canada, for example, healthcare, thanks to Tommy Douglas back in the 1960s, healthcare is free, in quotes, okay? You do not have to pay to go to the hospital or go see your doctor. You pass over your MCP card, and that covers the cost of it. And you say to yourself, wow, that's a system. It's a free system. But it's not free. Because when you pay taxes, and you pay high taxes in Newfoundland, those taxes go to support the MCP program. So you're paying for it through your taxes. Now, that means that if you use it or you don't use it, you're still paying for it. Again, a lot of people say, well, I haven't used the healthcare system. Why should I have to pay for it? Finally, we got this issue of carbon trading. Now, carbon trading, this is a big controversy right now, and that is countries are polluting. And what we're trying to do, one of the systems that they come up with is to say that polluters will have to pay more in terms of for what's called carbon credit offsets. So if you pump a lot of dirt into the air, you pay and you buy them from other countries who don't pollute as much out in the air. Now the question is, there's still just as much pollution going in the air, but it's going somewhere else. Is this workable or not? And there's a lot of controversy around carbon trading. And also in here, we talk about something called factors of production. And factors of production are the things that are employed. You could imagine as the items in a recipe, okay? And there are 4 items that go in the economic recipe. There's land, which is naturally occurring product. Labor, which is the physical effort and the mental effort to get the job done. Capital, which is the money and monetary resources, is not necessarily money. It's the stuff that money can buy. The resources that enable us to take advantage of land and resource opportunities. And finally, we got something called enterprise or entrepreneurship. And that is the wherewithal in people's minds to say, here's an opportunity that I can do something. I can think about that rock there. I can look at that rock on the ground and say, well, that's a lovely rock. I don't think much of it. I can move the rock. I can shovel the rock. I can kick the rock. I can break the rock. But it takes a genius to look at that rock and say, that rock is full of lead. You know, if I refine that, I could get lead out of it. And lead could be very useful in the production of batteries. Okay? So when we talk about enterprise or entrepreneurship, it is that mental stretch that allows someone to say, here is an opportunity of which I can profit from. Okay? The factors of production all have associated factor payments. So for example, if we think about someone going out there and working, the factor payment for working is wages. Whereas if we think about capital, having to get money, well, interest and dividends and these sorts of things are the payments that are made for the use of money. If we think about land, well, governments are responsible, the people, government is owners of the land. So if a company comes in and takes advantage of the land, if an oil company, for example, drills for oil and pulls the oil out of the ground, that company would pay a payment called royalties to the government, as is in the case of Newfoundland. Entrepreneurship, or the enterprise one, the fourth one, is kind of weird because you ask, well, what is the factor payment for that? But we ask ourselves, why do entrepreneurs do what they do? Why do people come up with ideas, and what do they get out of it? Well, they get profit from it, right? They benefit themselves, because if someone like Jeff Bezos come up with an idea of Amazon as a way of selling things online, he is making oodles of money now, because that is an idea that many people have hooked on to. And every time someone orders something, he makes some money. So that profit is what the factor payment is for that factor production. Because what we're dealing with here is a study of economics called microeconomics. What microeconomics really focuses on is the individual or the firm and the choices an individual or a firm makes in order to do the things that it does. So a little company or a large company, it doesn't matter, but it's a firm. And if a firm does one thing, it can't do something else. Okay? And because of that, there are opportunity costs. And companies are always checking to say, is there a better option? And we are always checking to see if there's a better option. Macroeconomics, on the other hand, which is a different course, macro looks at the economy as a whole and says, how's inflation? How are interest rates? How are things that affect the ability of money out there in the world? And really, if we think governments are really focused on macro things, the things that society as a whole are most concerned about, whereas individuals and businesses are more focused on the micro, which is how am I going to get through this day, or how am I going to make so much money in my business? We also talked a little bit about positive and normative statements. When we think about positive statements, a positive statement is one that can be proven to be true or disproven to be false. It is quantifiable. The sun is shining right now. It is. I can look outdoors and see the sun is shining. It's not a matter of opinion. If anyone looked out the door from my perspective right now, if anyone's here with me, they would look up and see the sun as well. It's unquestionable. Whereas if I said it's kind of cold today, well, how do you define cold? Cold from my perspective, your perspective might be different. You might think it's a perfectly good day. It's a perfectly good day. It's not cold. That's what we call a normative statement. A normative statement is one of opinion. And there's no real right or wrong to an opinion. It is people will hold different opinions. So if for example, that we say that, the CERB in Canada, we talk about the money that came out by the federal government because of the COVID. The CERB in Canada has been a giant waste of money. Okay, we could hear a political leader say that. Well, who says? Some people might argue that that's true, but others might argue they're quite the opposite, and they're equally right. So a normative statement is an opinion-based statement, whereas a positive statement is a fact or a disprovable fact, alternative fact, to quote Mrs. Let's look at this issue of fundamental economic questions. Okay, so you are now the super economist for Newfoundland. You are the person behind the controls, okay? And this is more macro than micro, but you're the person behind the controls and you're running the economy here in Newfoundland. Essentially, there are three questions that you need to answer. What should we make? How should we make it? And who gets what's made? And economies all over the world answer these questions every single day. Trying to determine what gets made, for example, in many societies years ago, we used to think about this type of situation in the Stone Age and say, well, what are we going to make? Well, generally, back in the Stone Age, we had society that was organized along cooperative means. I'll call it a cooperative means because people had to cooperate, otherwise they wouldn't survive. No different than Newfoundland 500 years ago. When people came here, it was a hard old place to live. People had to work together in order to survive, okay? So in a cooperation society, it's really more of a foraging, people going out and finding food. They go out in the ocean and look for it, or they go out of their cave and look for it. The bottom line is that people need to rely on one another to survive. And that's generally how those economic questions were answered in those types of society, is that we do whatever it takes to survive. You have more, you share it with me, and so on. Generally, if we look at the Middle Ages, before we were civilized, say to speak, a lot of those decisions on what should we make were really dictated by the king. The king was elected, and the king said, this is what we're going to make, and if nobody liked it, too bad. Off with their heads, right? So that was another type of society, and we really don't see too many of those societies around anymore, and because it gets people upset, and that is when one person makes all the decision. That's what's called a command society, okay? A command society where someone commands, this is what's going to be made. If you don't like it, too bad. Another type of society that has existed out there in which that decision of what gets made is really known as a custom society. And that's based on customs. We think that customarily, and you would think Newfoundland has an element of that too, customarily we ate potatoes and carrots because that was easily or relatively easily grown here. So there was a lot of that. So these traditional societies, you would think of religious societies and old-fashioned societies, of which it was customary to grow. We always grow potatoes because we always have grown potatoes. That's been the rationale for making business decisions about what should be made in society. In our society right now, we live more in a competitive society. These are theoretical constructs, okay? So you're never going to find the pure types. This is just kind of descriptors for broad categories. In a competitive society, what we do is we make decisions based on what we call the market. And the market really is a function of people are knocking on the door of companies saying, I'd like you to make this because I demand it. I want Ford F-150 pickup trucks because I like Ford F-150 pickup trucks. And if 23,000 people in Newfoundland want a Ford F-150 pickup truck, I'm sure Ford will supply 23,000 Ford pickup trucks. It's a way that companies react. They hear or they listen to what's going on in terms of the market, what customers demand, and they provide what customers demand. So as a result, the competition drives the companies to listen to customers' needs. So this basic question of what should we make is really answered by the market. We call it the market. How should we make it? Determining how we make things is really a bit of a trick, because generally things are either made by people. That's one end of the spectrum. And the other end of the spectrum is products are made by machines or equipment. And really, it depends on how sophisticated the society is or where we are in terms of the amount of technology. If you think about car production, for example, cars are produced now largely by robots, computers, because a lot of the work was pretty repetitive and people used to get tired and you got to train people and these sorts of things. So even though there are still people working on assembly lines, a vast majority of the work now is done by machines. And car companies have realized that if they can get large volumes of production, in other words, many cars being produced, that a machine, even though the machine is hugely expensive to buy, that machine can cut the cost of a given car down. The cost of making that car is reduced, okay? Now, if it's a specialty car, let's assume a Lamborghini or something like that, you'll find that those cars tend to be more handmade. Reason is you can't afford to buy that huge investment in equipment. Instead, you're making an investment in people who have certain talents. For example, people who can make leather seats, or machinists who can bore out engines, or these sorts of things. So it really depends on the product of what type of how it's made, more people or more machines. And effectively, everything in our society, because we live in a fairly competitive society, everything comes down to this concept of efficiency. And efficiency means that we get the most product out given an amount of input, okay? So the best bang for the buck, more or less. And in terms of efficiency that we normally talk about when we talk about efficiency, we're really talking about one type of efficiency called productive efficiency. And productive efficient means that we get the most out of a given amount of input. So for example, if you put in $100 worth of heat, you get out 100 units of product. And if you can get that same 100 units of product out for $90 a heat, that's a better way to do it because it will save you money. Okay, that's what we mean by productive efficiencies. So technology is often used to get that productive efficiency. It lowers the cost per unit, the amount of invested price into the unit. Another type of efficiency that we don't hear of as much is allocative efficiency. And allocative efficiency is more along the lines of a government type of concern, okay? So societies need to ensure the right type of products are produced. So let's say, for example, fire stations, okay, fire protection. There is no money in building fire halls and producing fire trucks because nobody's going to buy a fire truck. Communities will buy a fire truck, okay, but you and me are not going to buy a fire truck. So it is in the best interest of society to have fire trucks, because if we have a fire and people were to be hurt by it or property damage, we recognize that fire trucks are useful, particularly when there's a fire. So what government often focuses on is allocative efficiency, to make sure we got the right products that meet the society demands. So society demands, for example, fire protection, or society demands healthcare, or society demands any number of things out there that are for the common good. Probably business would look at it and say, I can't make any money making that. But from a government point of view, in order to be allocatively efficient, in order to ensure that people have the right protection in this world, be it healthcare, be it fire protection, government is going to demand that those types of needs are met. Okay, so who should get what's produced? That's the other thing. And that third question is a real problem for society, because if we think about who should get it, there's a number of ways that we can kind of spread products out. Well, we can think about it in terms of first come, first serve. The college is first come, first serve. The first people that apply to the college are the first ones that get in. The first ones that come to the store are the first ones that get the fresh bread. Okay? So if you're last, there might not be any bread left. So first come, first serve just means people are aware that the product is coming out. They need to be in the lineup to get it. And it's a traditional, time-honored, as they say, way of allocating resources. If you're the first one there, you're lucky. If you're the last one there, you're unlucky. Another way that we can allocate product is through lottery, and that is by, okay, your lucky number was called, you get a loaf of bread. You did not have your number called today, you don't get a loaf of bread. The moose call in Newfoundland every year, there's that people go out and get their moose, right? That's really done by a lottery. People put their names in, and there's 50,000 people putting their names in, but there's only 25,000 moose to be had or allocated. So as a result, 1 in 2 people will be lucky enough to get a moose license. Another way is through something we call seller's preference. And seller's preference is really, if the seller likes you, the seller will sell to you. If the seller doesn't like you, then the seller won't sell to you. I think of Costco using this model. Costco really uses a model of seller's preference because they have an entrance fee into their store. You have to be a member in order to get in, right? So effectively, the seller has an ability to control who comes into their store. Another type of method is through government decree. And, we say, well, what exactly is government decree? Well, all we got to do is look at COVID. Government says that the federal government is going to say that in order to go work for the federal government, now you have to be vaccinated. Otherwise, you won't be able to go to work. That's what we mean by government decree. Government will do that. The whole idea, actually, of the vaccine rollout has been very much focused on government decree. And the last way, which is the way that normally most products we have here in North America that you can take advantage of, is through what we call the market again. And the market means that if you have enough money and if the price is right, if for example, you say, okay, look, here's a product and there's a lot of people out for it, so I'm going to put a price of $100 on it, and you look at it and say, that's worth $100, and you buy it, we got a deal. If you say that's $100, that's too much, and you don't buy it, then we don't have a deal. So and if enough people say to me, I'm not going to buy it, I'm forced to reduce my prices. So the market comes into play with a lot of this idea of effective, efficient allocation of goods and services. Okay. And yesterday, too, I did talk a little bit about the concept of production possibilities. And this is a as I say, a fundamental concept that has been one of the core concepts of microeconomics, or economics in general, I suppose, but microeconomics in particular. And effectively, what it says is that countries, and this is more macro-y, I suppose, countries or societies or businesses or I suppose even you, are forced to make choice. We talked about this forced choice thing. You only can make one thing or the other. And if you make more of one, you have to make less of other. And if you make less of another, you can make more of one. So this really came into light in World War II, where we saw a tremendous demand for weapons. And when we had when the industry ramped up to produce weapons, what happened was there was no resources left to produce food. And as a result, a lot of people went hungry. So it just showed that, if we make more and more of one thing, something's got to suffer, because our society only has so much total capacity. We only have so many workers, we only have so much equipment, we only have so many factories, these sorts of things. Production possibilities is particularly important in the short run, because we can't change a lot of things in the short. You can't build factories, you can't train people very, very quickly. So as a result, you're going to face some shortages if you focus on building one thing. And during war, there was a situation where within 4 years, they had to focus a huge amount of their productive capacity towards the war effort, and that caused some problems. So the production possibilities curve is effectively a curve that is between 2 points. And the first point, or the first range of items, it deals with, we'll call them capital goods, okay? The normal analysis looks at the production of capital goods in a society. That is, goods that are used to produce other goods, okay? So if a society spends all its productive effort building capital goods, which the slang word is guns, in the case of World War II, it came up. If it produces more and more and more focus on those types of goods, something's got to give with regards to the production of consumer goods, which they called butter as a slang term in World War II. So the more and more we produce of one, the less and less we produce of other. And there's not a one-to-one relationship. In fact, we saw that if you push really, really hard and you produce a lot of one product, like for example, during the war, they produced a lot of military weapons, the production of food went down a lot. So out of it came this theory of production possibilities. And what we got is it built, using the data from the various permutations of production, meaning how much can you produce in guns and how much can you produce in butter at any given level. What we saw is it will produce this curve. It will produce a curve if we plot them on a line. And that curve has this type of slope. And effectively what we're saying is any combination of product that falls below the curve, so let's assume that combination A here, so this amount of butter and this amount of guns, if it falls below the curve, we can certainly produce it. If the combination falls above the curve, meaning we produce a lot of guns and a lot of butter, we just don't have the capacity to do that. So we just cannot produce X, but we can easily produce A. So our society will be, if we're working at full levels of production and everything's going tickety-boo, we should be able to produce, in theory, level D or B or C, and that works on various combinations. So effectively, this is what's called the production possibilities frontier. This is the limits of the productive capacity is illustrated by this blue line here. Now, the question is that line fixed? Is it something that will never move? And the answer is no. We saw production possibilities move constantly over the last 100 years, 150 years since the Industrial Revolution, because we've become more productive and allocatively efficient in terms of the products that we make. Technology has been very useful at allowing us to make more product. Farms, for example, let's go back to many years ago. Someone came up with the idea of fertilizer, okay? And we don't have to get into too deep into the story, but the basic fact of the matter, when you put fertilizer on ground, the ground becomes much more productive. So if you got a plot of ground that's the same size as it was last year, so we've got a fixed plot of ground, and last year we didn't have any fertilizer, this year we did have fertilizer, you can produce twice as much crop with fertilizer as opposed to when you don't use fertilizer. So the last topic here deals with this idea of trade. And trade is really a study in opportunity cost, okay? If you think about it, you say, okay, look, what is the cost of producing vegetables in Newfoundland? When I was in university, my last couple of years in university, I lived in Burton's Pond, and I could look out my window in the night, and Mount Pearl was ablaze. Mount Pearl was ablaze. And the reason Mount Pearl was ablaze is because of the Sprung greenhouse. The Sprung greenhouse was built in the middle of Mount Pearl, and it was bright. Man, was it ever bright. It was like a sun. And that was a cockamamie plan. We always seem to get caught in cockamamie plans here in Newfoundland. It was a cockamamie plan to grow cucumbers here in Newfoundland. And apparently it was hydroponic and could grow wonderful. And Brian Peckford, the premier at the time, got sucked into it. And they spent $6 or $8 million to build this giant greenhouse. And we built cucumbers. The problem is there was really no market for cucumbers here in Newfoundland. We're just too small a population. They all had to be shipped away. And the moment they ship away, the cost of them went up and they weren't cost competitive. So what's the lesson in that? Well, the lesson is that we can't produce everything here in Newfoundland, nor should we. Because certain things grow well here in Newfoundland, certain things do not. And in fact, Newfoundland was probably the first place in North America, it was the first place in North America, to realize this problem. The British traders that came over here and back in 1497 and shortly thereafter realized that, Newfoundland was good for one thing only, fish. So they came over here for cod because there was an abundance of cod and you could scoop it up out of the ocean and dry it and bring it back to England and sell it. And wow, you could make a lot of money. That's what they did. However, it wasn't very long before they realized they needed something besides cod to eat here. And the fine folks down in the Caribbean were really good at producing sugarcane, because sugarcane grows really well in the warm, hot climate of the Caribbean. Unfortunately, it didn't produce very good cod down in the Caribbean, and they really liked the dried cod that they produced here in Newfoundland. So Newfoundland regularly would ship dried cod to the Caribbean, Jamaica, and those types of places. And in fact, when the Newfoundlanders got down there, they said, what can we trade for this? Something that we can't produce very well in Newfoundland was cane sugar. And cane sugar was really good at making things like rum. So what happened is the ships would go right down with full of fish, unload the fish, fill up with rum, and head her back to Newfoundland, where the same thing would repeat. Well, we asked ourselves, what was the basic point of that? Well, the point of that was there was a realization that cod was plentiful and cheap, and we could make them really well here in Newfoundland, but we couldn't grow sugarcane very well. Had we had a sprung greenhouse, we probably could have grown sugarcane, but it would have cost a fortune relative to what you could make it down in the Caribbean. Likewise, the Caribbean could probably set up giant pools down there and cool them with giant refrigeration units and produce farm cod down there. They don't need to buy it from Newfoundland. They could certainly do that. But the price of a cod would be really, really high. So the idea of international trade is that, listen, instead of trying to duplicate and do everything, let's just focus on the things we do well. And what we'll do is we'll meet up with other countries or other parts of the world that do other things well, and we'll simply trade with them. So economics has proven the value of international trade. And this theory has held up right through, and it's unrefutable. It is very much, instead of a normative statement, it's very much a positive statement, meaning that international trade saves money and allows us to become allocatively and functionally efficient, okay? And here is the example. Now, I talk about the war effort here, but here's an example of international trade. Let's take a look at this center block here called country capacity. So assume Canada and the UK can make only two goods, guns and butter, with the resources that they have. So making more of one means making less of the other. So in this particular instance here, for example, Canada can make 20 guns, or alternatively, it can make 10 butter. And again, we've seen the production possibility curve. We know that one end is at one extreme, the other end is at the other extreme. So here are the two extremes. So Canada can produce 20 guns or 10 butter, or combinations between. And the UK is really good at making butter, but not so good at making guns. Look, they can make 20 butter or 10 guns. So if you look at it, we'd say, wow, we're good at making guns here relative to the British, and the British are good at making butter relative to us. So let's say that someone comes up with the brainy idea of saying, well, let's trade. So let's put a focus on trade. Okay? So let's assume that we go and trade. Or someone else says, no, I don't think we should trade. I think that's wrong. I think we should do it ourselves. Forget the British. We don't want to deal with them. So if we look at the two potential scenarios, one says, let's not bother to trade, and the other one said, let's trade. Okay? So in the no trade example, what we're going to do is split our resources. We're going to put half our productive resources in the guns and half in the butter. Okay? So here's what we could do before we got into this little debate. We could produce 20 guns and 10 butter. So let's produce half and half. So in this case, half the number of guns is 10 and half the amount of butter is 5. So we're going to go out and we're going to say, okay, we're going to make 10 guns and 5 butter. So that means half our people are working at the gun production and half our people are making butter. And the UK says the same thing. Let's make what we make. Let's put half our production into making butter and half our production into making guns. So let's assume that under that scenario, they can make 5 guns and 10 butter. So what they're doing is not trading, but putting half the resources into each one of those items. And if you add up the total items that are being produced, there's 15 items for Canada and 15 items in the UK, 30 items are being made. If we tallied it all up together, it'd be 30 items made. Now, let's assume that someone else says, no, that's a stupid idea. We really need to trade. So let's trade. And what we're going to specialize, we're really good here in Canada at making guns, and the British are really good at making butter. Look at the numbers. So Britain, you focus on butter. Canada, you focus on guns. So all our production goes into making guns. We know we can make 20. There's no production capacity whatsoever for butter. That comes with a risk, right? That comes with a risk, but we say, nope, we're not going to focus on butter. We're going to focus on guns here in Canada. And the UK say likewise. They say, we're no good at making guns relative to the Canadians, but we're really good at making butter relative to the Canadians. So what happens? So we take half of what we make and we ship over to them. They take half what they make, ship over to us. So we still got stuff. But look how much we get. There's a total of 40 items being produced now. 20 guns in Canada and 20 in the UK. Without trade, there was only a total of 30 items being made. So we've increased our productivity. In other words, for a given amount of input, we've gone from making 30 in total to 40 in total. So effectively, the trade has allowed us to make about 30% more product. And we're both better off. Instead of 15 and 15, now we get 20 and 20. So concept of trade has proven out to be an effective way for societies to become more productive. We see it all the time. There are no televisions made in North America anymore, for example. You can't buy a television that's made in North America. And the reason is because it's more cost effective to make it in the third world or somewhere in China. Spacecraft, airplanes, things like that tend to be made in North America because those are higher, more sophisticated, more valuable products. So we've tended to focus on the higher value products here, and we've left the lower value products to other countries to make. And as a result, we've become quite wealthy because of it.